Are you guys ready?
Yeah, sure
All right, let's
thing.
dive in. So, for those listening on the YouTube page, we're back doing another recording. It's been a long time, but I'd like to introduce you to two of my athletes. This is Linnea on the bottom there, and Mary Beth up on the top with me. And Linnea and Mary Beth have both been with me in the remote coaching program for about a year now, and we're both kind of in a well, Linnea's kind of starting her transition period, taking a little break before diving back into training for the next cycle, and Mary Beth's kind of regrouping after a fall season, and so we I wanted to kind of bring them together, to kind of share notes, as both athletes within the system with kind of a similar journey so far to kind of bounce ideas, bounce experiences off each other. I always like to, since we are remote, bring athletes together when we can to just kind of share their experience because so much of it is just kind of on your own. And I wanted to kind of share that conversation with everyone out there in case you find it helpful. I always enjoy talking to athletes. I've spent so many times talking to athletes in my office and then partway through the conversation been like, man, I wish I could have like shared this with other athletes, because there's so much helpful information that you kind of, go over in any kind of conversation, especially kind of a annual debrief. And so thank you to Mary Beth and Linnea for kind of agreeing to, hop on and kind of share our conversation with the community. But with that in mind, we'll kind of turn our focus to ourselves and you guys just met each other, here. And so, I wanted to kind of start. And the ultimate goal is just to kind of really get a sense of what you got out of the program, big epiphanies that you had along the way, things that worked. I also really want to know things that may not have worked, that may have caused us to pivot partway through. And kind of along the way, you can kind of bounce questions off each other. If something kind of stands out that resonated with the other athlete, kind of chime in and kind of share it. But to kind of kick this conversation off and start, I just want to kind of ask you guys, kind of what was kind of the biggest, most impactful change that you made this year with your training, that was really kind of like almost a paradigm shift maybe in terms of what you were used to before. And actually, I'll take a step even farther back. I'll save that one before. I would like to have a little background so you guys can kind of share with the people listening of kind of what your background is, how you found GTS, and kind of what your experiences was before that you brought
Mhm.
into the program. And Mary Beth, I'll have you start and just kind of let us know where you came from in the sport.
Sure, yeah. So I discovered rowing in college. I had played some other sports, but really fell in love with it. Just joined a novice program. And I did that for like 3 years. And then I kind of got into some other sports and I didn't come back to it for almost 30 years. So I guess it was last fall. I'm a mom. My kids are launching from the nest. So I finally had some time to think about like, things that I might enjoy doing. And I've always liked being outside and active. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to do a guest row. Actually, you know what happened is that I watched the men's four win gold. And I got so excited watching it. I was like, oh my gosh, I remember this. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go just get in the boat one time because I hadn't done it in so long and see what it's like. And I loved it. I was smiling the entire time, although my hands were like turning into like raw meat because I hadn't done it in so long. But we have a small club where I live, and so I kind of tried attaching myself to that and really didn't get super far with learning and fitness and things like that. And so I started kind of digging around and talking to teammates and was trying to look things up online and like ask people for advice and didn't get super far with that. And so I think I encountered your content, Travis, because I was trying to learn about like different kinds of workouts. Like people talk about like the heart rate zones and like the different types of workouts. And I was like trying to figure out how to make a plan for myself. So I think because I was looking up all that stuff, I was getting your videos and I was watching them like, oh, this is really helpful. But I honestly like still don't really understand what the heck to do with this. And so finally I was like talking to one of my teammates about like things I was going to try to do. And he was like, yeah, but you don't have a coach. And I was like, you know what? You're right. So that's how I came to you. And I feel like that's when I was able to really get kind of more, more serious, not necessarily in my mindset, but like just have an actual plan and like make some progress. And I know I've told you this many times, but it's such a luxury having a coach just focused on you and what you need to work on, because you get to make progress. And, being on a team, you're often, I don't know, you're trying to get what you can out of it in this bigger sort of synergy, which is cool. But I think for me, at my stage in life, it's just really nice to have that kind of support. So, so then I started this summer trying to teach myself how to scull, so that I could, train and row without needing like a team structure. And man, I had no idea how hard it was going to be.
Mhm.
So I think my first epiphany was, I'm not going to learn this in a few weeks. And then it was like, I'm not going to learn this in a few months. And now I'm kind of seeing like how it's really going to be a long-term project, and that's okay because, I want to do it and I'm working on it. Um, but I'll stop there because I think I've had some other like big pivots. But that's just kind of where I am, coming into our chat today.
Awesome. Well, I got a lot to kind of pick and kind of pull out of that, but let's Linnea, you can give us your background because certainly on the sculling side, a lot of similarities there, but you know, give us the update. How'd you find it? Where you're coming from, your background in the sport.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so nice to meet you in person. So that's great.
Absolutely. Same.
So I started rowing as an adult 5 years ago. So I was 42 then, 47 now. And I but I'd been athletic for a while before then. So in my 30s, I started doing CrossFit and I enjoyed it. And there is an erg in CrossFit, and people erg very badly, but they do erg. Or they erg well for CrossFit. It's not rowing erging. And then, but I quickly got really into strongman competition. So I spent about 4 or 5 years getting really, really strong and doing strongman competitions, which was very fun. I went to nationals, which is a lot of fun. And then, but that was really hard on my body. I was constantly bruised and like on the edge of injury. And I also moved from New York City to New Hampshire, and was going to be near a river, and there's fewer people. I'm sure there's rowing in New York City, but I think it's a lot harder to get to. And I kind of always wanted to try rowing because I'm quite tall in college. Rowing coaches wanted me to row, but I just didn't have the time in my college career to do it. And so I decided that I was going to learn to row and make it my next competitive sport. And so I joined a team around where I am, a club that had, well, actually, I did two individual sculling learn to row sessions and then two recreational sessions. They were sort of having a rec team, but then the rec team dissolved and the person in charge just threw me on the competition team. And so I got a lot of good coaching from the other people on the competition team, and we did sweep and scull. But after 4 years, I felt like I wasn't making progress anymore. And especially going into last year's winter session, the winter programming, I just didn't feel like I knew how hard to go. That was the biggest reason that I wanted to have someone like look at my times and help me prepare a program that I could work on in the winter on my own, and not just try to kill it every single session, which is what I was doing in the winter before then. So I started looking people up, and Travis's name came up, and I'm going to be an unusual remote client because I'm not actually remote, because I started looking at like who were good remote coaches, and I saw Travis's name and I was like, wait, Travis Gardner? Wait, I know him because I had met him at various clear sort of club events. He's involved in the local club a little bit. And so then I reached out. And so we've been able to do kind of a hybrid in person and remote coaching. So I do a lot of erging, especially on my own, and sculling on my own, and sculling with my team. But then he's also able to take me out in person, which is really amazing. Although I know you've gone out with him in person recently too. And I mean, I feel like we kind of rebuilt my stroke from the ground up, and that was great. And every single time he told me something new, it would be like, well, this feels weird, but I'm going to give it a try. And it usually only took like even half a session before I could see that it was making me faster. And so I've always, every single thing I feel like that he's told me to do, I'm either still working on trying to do, or I've integrated it and it's improved my rowing. It's made it more comfortable. It's made it feel both easier, but also like I can push harder. So yeah, and after the winter session, I rejoined the team, but he had me going out in Zephyrs, and at the end of the season graduated me from a Zephyr to a racing single, which was really fun to see all of that transition to being in a single. And so I'm looking forward to getting in boats next year.
Awesome. Yeah, it's
That's
been
awesome.
fun, kind of, I really try to keep my head down in the local scene, and like I really like the chance to just be an athlete sometimes and not be a coach, and so kind of enjoying the local club is really just like I could just came as an athlete and kind of, kept to myself. And so it was fun when Linnea found me, and because I do really enjoy working with you guys in person, even though it's not a luxury I get as much. Though, we can talk a little bit about the workshop, Mary Beth, that you were able to come up for, later on in our talk. But yeah, the I think it's funny because Linnea, we really had a lot of experience in sculling. Before she had been in sculling boats, she spends a lot of time in quads and doubles with the team. And as she mentioned, being able to kind of start in the winter. The winter is my favorite time to start with an athlete because it just build the stroke on the erg, build it the way it needs to be. I'm a big believer in take step one before you take step two. Doesn't matter whether you got a race coming up at a certain point, and school teams kind of fall into this trap where they're like, oh, we're starting every in the fall, and then 5 weeks into the fall season we have a head race and they have to race. And it's like, no, they don't have to race. You got to teach them the fundamentals. Take step one, then you can step two. And so being able to kind of just on land through the winter kind of work and really break down that stroke and build it back up has been a great luxury. And then in the sculling, kind of bring back into the Zephyr, the Peinert Zephyr. For those listening, the Peinert Zephyr is my absolute favorite piece of equipment to teach sculling. I've taught all my scullers in the Zephyr. Those scullers have gone on to win many national championships. Some have made the national team. And so, in one of them, I love to tell the story, was in the Zephyr until 3 weeks before nationals because there was just still stuff that I was like, I want to get this the right way in the Zephyr before I put you in a single. I believe if you do that, then the transition to the single is very smooth. And Linnea, I think you found that this season as we did transition to single. And then 3 weeks later in the single, you got silver medal at the national championship. So it works. It's the process. It's right. Getting the fundamentals down before moving on into the more challenging environment is great. And so, I'm curious, and Mary Beth, kind of having come from, well, we can talk a little bit about your experience kind of in the workshop that we did and kind of start more from the end and come back because you were able to fly up here to do that workshop, which is actually, interestingly, what GTS was designed to do originally, and GTS launched in May of 2020 with plans to have, sculling camps and learn to scull camps that may or may not be able to travel to people. And, we all know what happened in, the spring of 2020. So it kind of, abandoned that plan and went to remote, which has been in the primary thing. But the goal is next year to really get those workshops and those training camps together. But, coming from, I'm curious and kind of you kind of on your own hop into the Zephyr, we're spending our into the racing single, we're spending the time there, came up and we really, same way with Linnea, we took a step back on the erg and really broke down her stroke, even though she was 5 years into it rowing, really broke it down, worked on fundamentals. We did a very similar thing for you in the single and coming back into the Zephyr when you got here. And I'm curious kind of your takeaways from that and what kind of like big, you know, oh wow, kind of moments that you had and kind of doing that and how you've been able to kind of pull that forward. Granted, it's only been about 3 weeks since that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I am still learning a lot of fundamentals, which is it's challenging to be here, with equipment and wanting to work on things and not having a coach laying eyes on me every day or having like a in-person practice program. But that's just what, that's what being a master's athlete is. Like, you're just sort of making it work, So, I think we did a lot remotely, especially on the erg. I mean, I had some like pretty critical things going on that were not working well that you figured out pretty quickly. And so I think every time I've made improvements, even, just even through like your prompts on the erg remotely, it's helped me in the boat. But trying to learn how to scull with no guidance on like how to set up equipment or what to choose, how things look, what it should feel like that's been really tough. So so I was a little bit hesitant about like committing to doing like an intensive without having any experience in the boat. I'm grateful that I at least, got in the boat a lot before I came to work with you more intensively. But there was a lot that I learned during that weekend that it was really kind of the beginning. I would say like understanding how to use the trainer was really helpful, through like the practices that we did, things to focus on, like you were kind of showing me, this is a stable platform, which it was by that point for me, I mean, I think if it was the first time I got in that boat, it might not have felt that way, but, that I could really like feel the space around me and like, you were kind of coaching me like how to keep my oars off the water and like, going bigger into the, like, I don't think I ever have taken a full stroke by myself, like full length, before that. So that was really essential. And then we also did some erg time and you were noticing some things about my stroke that probably were hard for you to see by video. I'm imagining. So that there were some more like key changes for me to make, which, I mean, I have been rowing in a double with a friend of mine and we did do a head race just kind of as like a first go at it. And that was like 5 days after I came back from working with you. So I did immediately feel some differences. I mean, it's been kind of terrible because in adjusting my form, I'm like struggling with like, I know it feels like it's going to feel better and it definitely feels better in the boat, but I feel like I was on this trajectory of like getting faster and faster and faster. And it kind of just like a little bit. So I don't know. I think every time I have a new thing to work on, it's like very humbling, that, oh, there's more. And oh, this was wrong in my body. And I have to like reteach my body how it's supposed to feel, but then kind of trusting like it's going to work out in the long run for the best. So, I mean, I think coming in person was like really key. And, while I was there, I was like, how often can I do this? Because this would really help me. But, it's a big commitment. So have to be balanced about that. But yeah, we did a lot of work in a couple of days. And when I came back, I because we were doing the head race, I didn't get in a single for a couple weeks, but I got to last weekend. And I used our trainer, or one of our club's trainers. It's not a Zephyr, but it worked well. And I thought I was going to get in and kind of be where I left off when I was working with you, and I wasn't. It didn't take me long, but I was like, oh, I did actually learn things during that session. Like it wasn't just, kind of a one-shot assessment of like what I was able to do in the Zephyr that day. I really did progress like during those, couple of days. And when I came back and kind of got back on the water again, I was like able to sort of pinpoint like the changes I had made and like focus on those again. So, I mean, that might be my last day on the water for this season. We'll see how the weather goes, but I'm excited to pick up there. I mean, I think continuing with some in-person work probably would be ideal for me because I really like it. And the water time is awesome.
Yeah. Linnea, you get a little spoiled because
I do.
we row out of the same spot. But yeah, and I mean, I think both of you actually, the big focus on the water, a lot of it was grip and how we hold that handle, how we interact with that handle, like kind of over gripping really kills the rowing stroke, especially in sculling. It really kind of, retards our feeling for the stroke and the balance and kind of, and also allows us, kind of changes how we move, with the arms and body kind of going through. And Mary Beth, you definitely got kind of the crash course in the 3 days that we had. And then we were able to, like you said, we were able to transfer that and get you comfortable being long and really stretching out the front end, which comes to what you were talking before about being balanced and keeping your blades off the water. If you're dragging on the water, you're not comfortable. You instinctively learn really quick to, well, once you get your blades in the water, you don't have to worry about balance anymore. And so there's just a lot of people that row quite short at the front end, and if we can get comfortable, can get balanced, that's really important. And again, if like I'm a big believer that the balance of the boat is not something you do. Like it's a consequence of taking a quality stroke. And people talk so much about set this, how do we fix the set? How do you do that? The set is just the result of doing everything else right. And so if we can do everything else right, and we can train our body to do that on a stable platform, then when we move into an unstable platform, we're still doing everything right, but now we're just in an environment that's going to punish us a little bit more if we do it wrong. But if we're very close to doing it right all the time, then that punishment will be very small. It'll be enough to kind of like wake us up, be like, oh, don't do that again, get it back. But if you don't have that fundamental stroke and you're just stuck in a single, every stroke you're spending getting punished, being punished fairly brutally, in the single. And so how can you develop that foundation of the stroke if you're in that unstable environment? And the same reason, and you never throw novices in an eight and just start rolling by eight on the feather. Like nobody does that. I think people do that too soon. But even the people that do it too soon, they're still at least starting rowing by pairs for, maybe 10 minutes, and then they're rowing by fours for maybe a couple of days, and then they're rowing by sixes, hopefully for months, before rowing by eight to get that fundamental thing. And so, and Linnea, I think Mary Beth, you kind of hopped in the single this summer, kind of like were teaching yourself. Whereas, Linnea, you'd spent a decent amount of time in sculling boats, from what I understood, and doubles and quads, and had at least kind of maybe tried in the single, but were in that place where you're just not comfortable because you're just getting punished all the time. And so I'm curious, and kind of for you, having gone from that environment where you were sculling, and certainly in a quad, as we talked before, the quad is kind of the most enjoyable boat if you're not rowing it right, because it kind of absorbs kind of the bad because things are still symmetrical. But kind of what were the kind of epiphanies that you had and the big changes that we were able to make, in terms of pulling you out of those doubles and quads and just really getting down to fundamentals, in that Zephyr, and then being able to transfer that back into, the racing boats?
Yeah, it was a lot of things. And what you're saying about feeling punished, that's definitely, I would go out in racing singles in the years before and just never enjoy it and always feel like I'd take a few good strokes and feel good and safe. And then I'd take some strokes and I wouldn't feel safe and I wouldn't really understand why. And so it just always ended up being no fun. And so it was really amazing to get in the Zephyr, and in doubles, I've also felt like I was always going to capsize, but with the stuff we worked on, I felt completely fine in doubles this year. And it was a lot of things. I think some of the things that were really effective to transfer from the Zephyr to the team boats was blade depth. A lot of the time, the lack of set in the team boat, including for me, came from one blade being deeper than the other. It's really easy for everyone to have their left blade deeper. And then some more subtle things like the hands. And that I don't feel like I really started to get a handle on until the end of the season, when Travis was like, I want your fingers pointed like forward, not down. That's how far it needs to be out in your hands. And so the last few weeks of the season, that's what I was working on. And it made a huge difference. But then just sort of feeling what it's supposed to feel like, even if it can't feel like that in a team boat, having in my body, like knowing how it should feel and what I can be reaching for made a big difference. And even in the sweet boats, which is not my favorite boat, I was able to apply some of the things like the just the waiting to, move the separation. That's what we always call it. The like knees or body, arms, body, then legs, and keeping those super, super separated no matter what kind of boat I was in made every single row feel better.
Awesome. Yeah, and for those fingers, you said forward, we want them down. I think the big thing is like people tend to grip, and so their fingers are
Yeah.
pointed back at them. And I was like,
Oh
don't
yeah, I
point
guess you
back.
said not back at you, but
Yeah,
down. But I
yeah,
like in order to force myself to really do it, I'm like no
yeah.
more than down. Like if they're
Yeah,
even like that, but especially
love
when I'm going pushing out, then I'll set myself up to be in a good
them.
position. Well, that was something else that you said that I really liked was more than drills, you liked having athletes kind of exaggerate one thing or another to feel what it felt like and then sort of
Yeah,
work it back into a more natural feeling stroke, but try to sort of push
Mm.
various directions, rowing super shallow to get used to what that felt like, um, and then kind of settling back into what a regular stroke would look like.
definitely. Yeah, I'm really not a fan of drills. I don't use them a lot. If I use them, there's a very specific purpose. I really like exaggerating things, exaggerating a feeling, exaggerating emotion. When we're talking about a light grip, we'll take strokes where we're literally on our fingertips. We're like, be
Mm.
the minimal possible interaction with that blade. Feel, if you're not gripping, you can't go deep with the blade because you don't have enough grip to push the blade into an unnatural depth. You feel kind of how effective the blade is when it's shallow and you're
Mm.
using the full length of blade. You got maximum torque, on the blade. With the, you know, one thing that we both do, and I do with all my athletes, even varsity athletes that have, medaled at nationals or won nationals, is that when we're training either in a Zephyr, in a stable platform, in a Zephyr, and an 8x6 is, we're always squaring up super early.
Mhm.
Square up early because I want it ingrained in your stroke what it feels like to approach the catch with a square blade, a blade that's ready to go in the water. Because it's a very different feeling to be able to just go up and drop, then go up, hurry up, get the blade on the square, and then rush to get in the water. And so if the stroke that feels natural is a stroke that the blade is prepared and then it enters, then anytime you deviate that's your warning sign. That's like, whoop, something was wrong. And kind of developing that the ability for the mind to just kind of tweak and say, whoop, red alert here, something was off on that is important. Whereas, so many people are just like they're carrying that blade either close to the water on the feather, and then they get to the catch, and then they've got their blade is so close to the water that they've got to push it down to get enough to get the blade square, and then because they push down, the boat is falling to the side, and then they're uncomfortable. Whereas if you're just sitting up tall, you square up early. And the great thing for almost all exaggerations is that they naturally fade to the proper stroke as you go up in higher rates and as you go up in difficulty. Like it's like we're talking like I might encounter 1 in 100 athletes that will continue scoring up early even when they start rolling by all eights and at eights, or they start bringing up the rate, and you've got to get them to kind of come back down. Almost exclusively, athletes will just those exaggerations just blend into the appropriate square up timing when you bring up the rate, bring up the pressure again, because you've developed a feeling of what it should feel like going up to that stroke. And so the athlete knows instinctively, well, it feels a little awkward to square up super early if you're rolling into headwind, you're moving quick. And so it kind of gets to where it needs to be. So you're still squaring up and you're not doing that flip catch. And so that definitely is a big thing. And having the lightness in the hands helps that too because it makes it very easy to just flip that blade onto that square. Whereas if you're motorcycling your grip, you're messing up everything. It's not a feel. You're not feeling the boat. You're not responding to what's happening with the boat. You're just kind of going through a pattern of motions that you've ingrained, whether it's right or wrong. Especially in a single, you need to have this organic relationship with the boat and the balance of the boat to be able to adapt at all times of what's happening. Is the boat a little bit off to one side or not? One hand gets heavy, one hand gets light. It's not that you're pulling a handle up and not, it's just your hands are that counterbalance. And so yeah, I like it. And I think it really, I saw it too as a coach with you, Linnea, of kind of having a really good feel for that, moving up in that front end.
And this most recent, the last time I got out on the water and before it got real cold here it was really windy also. And I decided that I was going to start squaring up a little later to handle the really strong winds. But I still felt like, even though I was squaring up later than how we've been drilling, I was still squaring up plenty early, and my catch still felt the same, even though my square was later to account for the wind.
Definitely. And Mary Beth, a big focus of our time together on the workshop was that grip, and so how did that, you had a really good blade depth, naturally, so we didn't have to spend a lot of time with that, which was great. But you definitely came and you're kind of rowing, blades were kind of feathered, dragging on the water. We would kind of flip in and we changed that right away. And so I'm curious, kind of in terms of your impressions taken out of how that change was feeling and kind of what were kind of the things that I may have mentioned that you may have done that really kind of sparked that new feeling of how to hold that handle?
I think that there were lots of things. I'm trying to like reach back into my mind. I mean, one of the things that was helpful was making sure my hands were close enough to the edge of the handle. So I think you said because sometimes they would sort of sneak out, and one of the prompts you gave me was you shouldn't see a lot of handle between my first two fingers and the edge. So that was helpful for me just in kind of remembering, and then also where to touch my hands to the handle. And we could see that I had blisters way down too far, which I knew that I was doing this because I'm kind of scared about losing my oars when I'm rowing in the double with my friend at higher rates. So I know I'm doing it, but I also don't really know the right way to do it, So we talked about, I think we talked about, well, one of the things you said was coming back, it's really just kind of like a loose hook. And then coming forward, I'm really just on top of the oars like this. There's just a little bit of light pressure on the top, and that helped a lot. But then also just practicing the flicking thing. And I think, I sort of understood what that was going to feel like, but focusing on where on my fingers that would happen and which fingers. And then I think you said something about coming back in, just the motion of the feathering the blade, turning the oar out will sort of, there's something that you said about the force of it kind of makes it happen naturally. And just for me, I tend to do this. So I have to try to think about not bending my wrist down too much.
I'd say at the release, we don't want to be like Iron Man with your wrist blasts and blasting the stern there. It's, and what we're talking about kind of it should be natural is that if you're hooked right on the oar is here, you're pulling back. So if you were to release those fingers, your hand would fall off the oar, right? And there's friction that does that, and so essentially at the release, you kind of let that happen. You come to the release, you kind of release the fingers a little bit. And then because you don't have that hook anymore, you kind of pull back on the oar and you're letting kind of the friction on that oar kind of take it and put it onto the square. And you have to time that with the tap down. So you got just a little bit of motion down. In a sculling boat, you're only talking a centimeter or two because your oars are so long. But yeah, you just kind of open the fingers a little bit. That'll kind of feather the blade. And then you just could carry it. And inevitably, there's going to be a little bit of a roll down of the wrist, but you really want it to be more like this than, wrist down. Because if you have this, right, you still have ballast on that oar, right? Even if you're here, you still have a little ballast. You can just put your weight. Whereas if you're here, you're actually pulling down on the oar and you don't really have control. You don't have a feel for the balance. And so we want to keep that wrist there. So we come, that blade feathers, you might be down here, but then as soon as you start moving forward, you got to reorient so that your hand is back on top and you got a flat thing to put ballast. And then you do that like when you're squaring, if you're squaring properly, squaring is just this.
Mm-hmm.
It's just you're just flicking with the fingers down. There's no wrist action in squaring a sculling blade. The
Mm-hmm.
handle's thin enough in sculling that you don't need the wrist, whereas in sweep, you need a little bit of a wrist. So on sweep I like to kind of flick the fingers and pull on the thumb to get it back onto the square and still keep my wrist out of the action as much as possible. But that's a huge thing, right? Because if you do that properly, you still have ballast. You still have ballast on the oar. You're still balancing. You can feel the weight of the oar. Whereas as soon as you break your wrist, you don't have that control. You've lost that feeling. And we both worked on that kind of, and it made huge differences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
Linnea,
another
you got to play a little bit, kind of at the end of the year and kind of, shoot up the rates in the Zephyr. And so we can talk about that. But whatever I just cut you off on, hop in.
Yeah, sorry. I wanted to say that one of the other things I noticed for keeping my wrist flat at the release is that I'm always working on trying to get my elbows further back and a more aggressive finish. And especially because I'm tall, I can sometimes get away with being lazy at the end and lazy at the front because I still have a plenty long stroke. But having flat wrist kind of gave me more room to pull my elbows back. And so it felt more natural to do
Yeah.
that and easier to do that. So that was a huge thing as well.
Yeah, I was thinking about that same thing actually, because that was something I really had to change was like, it's almost like kind of like subtly engaging the posterior of my body a little bit more. But like when you talk about it, like your elbows hitting the wall, you can't really do that unless you have something stable behind you. And I felt that way too, that like when I was doing my hands correctly, I sort of understood that better. And people had always told me things like, I don't know, it was almost like more of a focus on like the front of the body or like the space in front of the body versus like the actual body. Like, the order of things or use this part of your body, like um, or like pausing or quick hands away or not quick hands away or micro pause. Like I've heard all these different things and none of that really made a difference because it was really just the speed. It wasn't the activation.
Mhm.
So that's been really helpful for me.
Yeah, I think a lot of coaches, when they're communicating what they want to see, and they're not communicating how do you achieve that. Like, what does the person have to do? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to focus on the consequence. You want to focus on the action that creates the consequence that you want. Um, and so, yeah, and so talking about the body, how's it feel? What are you doing? What are you moving? What part of the body? Like, we never move the handle, right? Because the handle's not us. The handle is just what we happen to be holding. So if you want to move the handle, you need to move either the hands or the elbow. I say you should always move the elbow, right? Because the elbow is attached to stronger muscles. If you move the elbow, it's conveniently attached to your hands. And so if you move your elbow, you will also move your hands. But communicating that and like this is how it should feel. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
always about that. Like the rower has to understand how it's supposed to feel. Like, don't talk about what you want to happen if they do it right. Talk about what does it feel to do it right. And also, I try it sometimes with athletes. What does it feel to do it wrong? I don't do it as much, but I'm like, let's deliberately, Linnea, we talked about exaggeration, but let's deliberately do this wrong and feel how bad it is if you do that. Now, if you have a scaled down version of that, you still know, well, that kind of felt like when it was wrong, just not as bad. You're again developing a sense where that rower can self-correct. Just like we were talking about squaring up early, you have a feeling what it's like to put the blade in approach the catch with a blade that's prepared to go in. Same thing. If you know exactly how bad it feels if you do it, it's like, okay, oh, well, that was not quite there, but that was the feeling of what I remember from when it was bad. Um, Definitely the preferred way to go. But yeah, I
I
think
do think that is a big difference with your coaching than other coaching that I've received is that emphasis on how it should feel rather than how it should look. And I was actually thinking this earlier today that really is, I do feel like some of the other coaching I've gotten is trying to see like what do they want to see in the boat and try to make the rowers do that. And certain things like backing the blade in, I've been told that for years. And it took working with you for me to understand kind of why to do that and what it should feel like when that is working correctly. And
Mhm.
so that's been really positive.
Awesome. And Linnea, we can talk, at the very end, we were able to finally kind of translate some fun stuff into Zephyr. And along the way, another big thing, and you can kind of speak to this a bit, is that when you get in the Zephyr and you're not rowing the Zephyr right, because the Zephyr is a training boat, it's designed for, ocean rowing, so it's got some stability. I love the Zephyr because it's also reactive enough that you can kind of feel the first 10, 15% if you're doing something wrong before the stability kicks. So it's still very reactive to what you're doing. It's just not punishing. But, beginning of the season, we'll talk about, the Zephyr, it kind of feels heavy. I would say once you start rolling the Zephyr right, it shouldn't feel heavy, right? It should just feel slower, but
Yeah.
not
Mhm.
heavy necessarily because it's still a very well designed boat. Um, and and you were able, I think, kind of as we moved through the summer, maybe about halfway through the summer, you started to kind of I remember you started to kind of say, oh, I'm starting to feel that lightness. We were starting to kind of be efficient at the end. If you're not trying to do too much at the front, if you're not trying to do too much at the back, if you're actually just tapping the boat along, you're not creating momentum every stroke, you're maintaining momentum every stroke. All of a sudden, a boat like the Zephyr, which is a training boat, can feel light. And then, of course, in our last, one of our last practices together, we started to do some builds and some high rate stuff, and even some sprints in the Zephyr. And so I'm really like
Mhm.
to hear kind of your, what you were able to get out of that, and what that change of feeling was as you went through the season.
Yeah, that's right. And thanks for reminding me because it really did feel great at the end. But the first, I guess, for a lot of the season up until maybe August this year, I would go out in the Zephyr, but it felt heavy. Did not feel fun. It made me feel like I'm going to do this to get better in the team boats, but I don't really like being in a single because the Zephyr feels so heavy. But as we kept working together and as I kept applying things, there were times it started to feel much lighter. It never felt fast, but I felt like for one thing, I was enjoying it. But also every stroke felt like I wasn't fighting the boat. I was working with the boat. And I think I also at the end just started to have to put in a lot less effort to move it at the same speed, which
Yeah.
is never fast. Especially our river goes against it's a river for one thing, and it's often against the tide, and it gets pretty windy, and so you can see like a minute difference in your split between going out and coming back. And except doing, I don't know, except rowing a 47 that one day, I've never got below a 2, and most of the time I'm at like between a 240 and a 340 in a Zephyr, which is like not numbers I like to see, but in a Zephyr, it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've won national championship. I won Canadian Henley. I can move boats very fast, very well, but I do almost all my stuff in a Zephyr. I like it. You can row it well. It still feels light. Sure, you're gonna be slower. One, I could care less if it's windy. Doesn't bother me. If I get waked by a boat, okay, give them a wave, keep going. No big deal. And so it's just you can get out there, you can get that enjoyment in no matter what.
Mhm.
It's also a third of the cost, $6,000 boat versus $18,000, what they cost now for a Philippi, a new Philippi. But yeah, it is good. And if you are rowing it well, you can row it quickly. You can row the higher rates, and we were able to kind of play with the higher rates and then, and even kind of doing some sprints. And so we were forcing into the sprints. So what did we get your rate up to in the Zephyr at the?
You wouldn't let me get off the water till I mean, I forget exactly what it was, but I do feel like it was, you at least wanted me to get over a 40, and it might have been, I
Oh,
think
you
it
were
was
higher
over
than
a
that.
40.
I think we were at
Yeah.
40, 46, 47, I
Or
think.
yeah, it was something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was,
Yeah. And you can't do that if you're rowing it poorly.
yeah.
You can't.
Mhm.
And most
That's
honestly,
amazing.
a lot of rowers can't do that on the erg because they row the erg improperly as well. It's like if you don't know how to kind of tap the boat, if you
Mhm.
don't know how to pull out all the junk in your stroke that slows you down, that makes things heavy, you can't hit those rates, you can't hit those speed. And so if you can do that in a Zephyr, which is inherently not the sleekest boat, it can move though. It is responsive. If you can do it in a Zephyr, all right, now we kind of understand. The other thing too is a lot of times I'll take athletes and we'll force you into those rates and we'll kind of be like, all right, let's row higher. And they kind of get stalled out around the 40. And then I'm like, stop thinking about rowing well or doing whatever. And just your single goal is to get that stroke rate up to 50 if we're in a single. A Zephyr 47 is great. Um, and you do that once they have a really, they have a good stroke and foundation. So they're not going to suddenly do crazy shit. But all of a sudden they're like, I have to get this. And then they will instinctively stop doing the things that are slowing them down. And they just relax and they just move. And there's no way you can move that quick if you have tension in the body. The only way to move that quick is to be loose and to be relaxed and to move lightly and quickly. And then once you hit that rate, then we can say, okay, now you've learned how to move your body quickly. Now learn how to do that with the power and start to get speed. And so then the 47 becomes a gear. All of a sudden you have fifth gear or overdrive, whereas you were just stuck in third before. You never could figure out how to get out of third gear. And I mean, there's people winning national championships that, at least the junior level where I spent a lot of time in, that can't do that, that don't know how to get into that gear. They're just really, really good at, gear three. But if you tell them, and I did this with you, Linnea, and I do this with a ton of athletes before I like talk to them about sprinting. I'm just like, row 15 strokes and go as fast as you can. Split, stroke rate, whatever. And they'll do it without any coaching. And inevitably, they're rowing a 37, 38 as hard as they can. Like that's their impression of fast. With me, like, I mean, there's a recording of me doing the 100-meter record. I'm like a 65 or something like that. And so if someone tells me to go fast, boom, the gear goes up. I'm going fast and I'm using that stroke rate as a gearing to move. A lot of people just can't do that. Like they just like they're just so ingrained in this, oh, the stroke is heavy and so they don't understand how to move quickly and how to use that quickness combined with good connection and good length at each end to create speed. That's actually, I've thought about kind of traveling to colleges and being like, hey, I can come and work with you athletes for 2 weeks in the winter. I'll teach you how to sprint for real. Like, because I think most people in the sport don't know how to sprint. So yeah, that was fun. And we'll do more of that. Linnea, you kind of have, we get to work together more closely because you're here. We've done a lot of that on the erg, but it'll be fun.
And a lot of the masters team boats row at that I've been in at least will row a race at a 28. And if you're, which is, it is what it is for the boat. But the nice thing about this training has been that if I'm able to row at these very high rates and feel comfortable, then a 28 or a 30 just feels totally fine.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and that's a big thing that we did with our erg sprint work as well. Is like like if you can row, high 40s comfortably, then you have developed the skills that you can row in the low 30s very relaxed. And so that will pay great dividends coming from. It's funny you said 28 because I've been outlining kind of the workshops I want to do next year with athletes, and one of them was the sales point was if you do your 2Ks at a 28, this workshop is it'll teach you how to row because it is like there's so many college athletes 26 to 28. You'll get heavyweight guys they'll pull like a 6'10", but they're doing it at 28.
Wow.
It's like holy shit, it's like you got so much more speed in you. As we're on the erg, I'd like to take a step back because we both obviously started on the erg. Linnea, you've made huge improvements technically on the erg, and we've gotten a lot of good speed development. Mary Beth, you especially. I mean, we were in the first month or so, you were turning in times for me on your steady state that were like 250, 240, and we're like, something's fundamentally wrong here. And we made those changes, and now you're kicking out steady state low 220s, high two teens. And so, I want to go through with each of you. Mary Beth, I'll start with you. Talk about that change because that's a huge change. That's basically figuring out how to apply your power. And I have videos talking about this on the channel, is that a lot of people don't believe me. Like I'll say there's no reason a male athlete should row anything above a 218 ever, unless you're like 90 or unless you're like, an adaptive athlete. And a lot of people like athletes will come to me and they're like rowing 226 on steady state. And I'm just like, There's no reason you should be able to do that. And then for the females, like I'm like 242, 241 is the slowest I would think a female athlete should ever row for steady state. And that was like a 75-year-old woman, doing steady states. And honestly, I take that back. That was just a one rower I had that just had really funky erg technique, and was very long though on the water. But even that 75-year-old woman, she was pulling 236, 238 for a steady state UT2 for an hour. Um, but yeah, so give the mic to you, Mary Beth. Talk to me about that transition. What was that epiphany that allowed you to start doing it? And then you've made a ton of progress even since making that change in terms of your steady state.
Yeah, well, you did that. You were the one that was like, something's not right here.
Yeah.
And then you did a video session with me, like live on the erg.
Yep.
And I mean, I think I'm trying to remember. It's so funny, like when you ask what was the epiphany, because it's like at the time I'm just like focused on like making this change. And then, once you integrate it, it's like kind of hard to remember what you were doing wrong.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that kind of like what you were saying, Linnea, like my whole like I knew how to do the middle of the stroke, but everything was sort of short and soft on the ends. And I think I'm still working on that. And I mean, honestly, like just my fitness in general, like for 20 years of not really doing much of anything. I've had to work on a lot of mobility. I've had to work on like strengthening muscles again. And just like, using my heart in the way that I haven't in a long time. But I think what we had talked about was like, you were like, first of all, how I was sitting on the seat. I think I was like, I think we talked about like moving forward more, like reaching forward
rotating
more.
those hips, yeah.
Yeah, rotating the hips, which I'm still honestly working on. But I think my stroke was really short and I wasn't using a lot of strength on either end of it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, like you were like, if we can fix this, your splits are going to go down by like 20 seconds. And I was like, huh? But it was true. I mean, maybe within, I don't know, 3 weeks, a month or something like
It was quick. I mean, you went down to 230, high 220s, 230s after the
pretty
Zoom
quickly.
session. So that was 20 seconds right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And over the course of the next month and a half, you were finishing your hour-long steady states in the high two teens, and
Yeah.
so, that's huge.
It
Because
got, yeah,
because one
it
of the
got
things
down to
was
like,
you had submitted some pieces where you're doing like 3-minute pieces, and your pieces were like in the 220, low 220s, and I was like, what? No,
yeah.
that's not right. And so now you're doing pieces in the 205, 206 range, which is where you're supposed to be. So, but yeah, it was big. There's that front end. We weren't really getting along at the front end and feeling the connection. The hips are essential for that. I 80% of the people that I see rowing and I start with, we have to address the hip position. So many people sit down and their hips just kind of slump because when we sit in our seats and we're
Yeah.
relaxed for long people, we just the hips kind of slide forward. We kind of let the body curve relax, and they sit like that on the erg. And you can't get to your natural catch position if you're like that. It's biomechanically impossible to get a
Hmm.
long front end if your hips are rotated posteriorly. So you got to get the anterior rotation. You got to be able to sit forward. Once you do that, you can feel that front end really stretch up. One thing, Mary Beth, that you've always done great, which I usually have to really coach in athletes, is that the handle should be up at the front end, like the rectangle that the chain goes through. The chain should be almost to the top of that rectangle. And Linnea, we had to work with you to get to this, but you've made the change faster than 95% of the athletes. Usually that is a struggle to get an athlete to come into the catch with arms floating up and raised so that there's no lift once they change direction. Fortunately, Mary Beth, you kind of had that naturally, but taking that and then taking the length so you can feel the length and you have
Hmm.
time to
Hmm.
accelerate, that was key. But it was a huge jump for you, Mary Beth, because yeah, you were turning in steady states that were high 240s, low 250s, which is unacceptable for a female
Yeah.
athlete. Even a female athlete that's in their 70s, I wouldn't accept that. That just tells me that you're not, it's not, has nothing to do with your fitness. It's just figuring out how to leverage. And the
Hmm.
analogy I say is that, let's say you're trying to loosen a nut on a big industrial machine, and you have a big industrial wrench that's 2 feet long. you know Most of the people with the rowing, they're holding that wrench 3 inches from the nut, right? And we all know about leverage. We all know if you hold a hammer right by the thing, you have a little more control, but you have no leverage. Same thing with the wrench. Like, farther you get away from the point of torque, the more leverage you have. And so, taking that into rowing stroke, like, you could, if you had a female that's 110 pounds that has barely any muscle, that definitely can't pull that wrench and loosen the nut. If she just literally hung on that wrench and bounced up and down, that's going to create enough torque to move to get that nut moving. And a lot of times when we got a tough nut, that's what we do. We kind of throw our weight into it to get it moving. Well, that weight, that is the minimum split on the erg, right? People using their weights on the handle, that's what gets you the 218 for guys. That's what gets you the 240 for women. So I know that no matter if you have zero fitness, if you're just using your weight on the handle appropriately, those are the minimum splits you get. And then you add your fitness to that, and you're getting, you know, mid two teens to Linnea, high two teens, low 220s, Mary Beth. And that's where we want to be. And so I love that, when I saw it, because it was so quick, it was so great. Seeing a 30-second drop on steady state is always a plus.
Yeah, definitely.
I know,
Um,
where's my 30
yeah,
second drop?
right. Well,
Don't want that.
you knew your level, Linnea. So,
Yeah,
but Linnea, you turned in some killer 300 pieces as your last workout of the season, and we've seen such huge improvements, especially
yeah,
on sprinting. We were able to spend a lot of time learning how to row high rates because you were one of those 28 SPM 2Kers,
yeah.
before. And, now you're going to be much higher. So, yeah, that was fun. It was fun to see.
And talking about like the pivot, I think that's kind of what I'm working on now. Is like it's still that I had forgotten all about that, but I still like when we met in person, isn't that something you pointed out that I was kind of like rounding under a little bit
Yeah,
at the back end?
yeah.
And yeah, I guess I've been using like my arm muscles and maybe the front of my core a little bit to
Mhm.
stabilize myself back there and like thinking about my using my back and my glutes and my like all of the muscles in my pelvis, like around my pelvis, like to not like tuck under and instead just like pull the stroke in. That's definitely a change for me now too. Um,
Yeah, that's another thing I do with so many athletes. Linnea, we did that too early on, making sure that we weren't laying back too far,
Mm.
mhm.
keeping your body weight over the seat so that your weight is supported by the seat at the back end. It's very important. It's you can get away with it on the erg. You can definitely get away with it when you're doing steady state on the erg. In the boat, if you're doing that, one, you're going to porpoise your boat, right? You're driving your bow into the water instead of cutting through the water. You're just kind of bouncing through the water to go forward. But also, if you're going too far back, if your weight's not supported by the seat, you got to literally pull yourself out of the release. Whereas you shouldn't have to do
Mhm.
that. The release is just sit back, sit forward, but your weight's still always supported by the seat. So yeah, we were working on that, Mary Beth. Linnea, we did that very early on when we were rebuilding your stroke. Um, and Linnea, I'm curious, looking back at that rebuilding process, for you and kind of breaking everything down, what was that like kind of, mentally and kind of going through that process of kind of breaking down your stroke and kind of rebuilding?
Yeah, I feel like I had kind of there were parts of my stroke that were already working, but we still had to really go back to basics. Because I was thinking when you were talking about sort of getting to the very um getting all the way up to the chain entry. I'd had a coach told me to do that, but I was kind of lunging into it instead of kind of floating into it. So
Mm,
there were pieces I felt like I could keep. And I guess, what was nice and what made it easier is most of the time when you told me to change something, it didn't take very long before I could see it making me faster and making it the same speed feel easier. So that was one of the reasons that it felt like easy to apply. Um, there were definitely times where I was glad that I had those early successes, because some slightly later changes you made, I'm like, oh, I don't, this doesn't feel good, but I'm going to trust the process. And it didn't take that long before it did start to feel good. I think, yeah, we talked about the layback, definitely not having too much layback. And especially because I'd have fellow teammates tell me that like rowing is like doing 1,000 sit-ups every morning. I'm like, that doesn't sound like it should feel like that. And it was kind of nice to have that validation when because we had the benefit of being in person. So Travis had me lay back and then put his hands on my shoulders, and I had to use all my core to resist. But then when I was over the seat and he pressed down, I could just press into the seat. And yeah, so those various pieces, and I felt like also they all work together. So it was the separation. When I was doing that right, everything just felt better. I'm able to get my separation, help me get my pelvis into the right position better, help me get forward better, help me get my chest forward so I could raise my hands into the catch. So like each thing going well fed into the next thing going well. I do also think my strength background was helpful for being able to make the changes quickly, because when the rowing stroke feels right, there's parts of it that feel like a good clean or a good deadlift. And you were talking about using the back of your body rather than the front of your body. It's very much like those posterior chain exercises, the rowing stroke. And so I do have that background of kind of feeling what that should feel like.
Definitely. What were some of those changes that you initially approached with trepidation? One of those that was like, I don't know about this, that kind of paid off.
I think it was the down and then up, kind of getting that V shape correct. Because it didn't feel natural. It didn't feel like it was necessarily helping. But as I kept doing it, then I could feel it moving the other parts of my body in ways they needed to be moving.
Yeah.
I think that was definitely one. And yeah, you had me very mechanically. I remember you kept using the word mechanically, like do arms, then body, then legs, like really separate them until that feels natural. And then you can start smoothing it together. Or actually, and what happened is it started just smoothing together on its own.
It does. Yeah.
But it was that extremely mechanical, and that made me slower, which I never like to be slower. And so making that extremely mechanical was hard to do, but very much worth doing.
Good. Yeah, that's another one of those exaggerations that fixes itself. It blends in. But yeah, people that blend too much, you just have to be like, make it robotic, arms, body, legs, keep the separation. And then once you do it enough, then when it does blend, it's a very subtle blend, which the stroke should be, because I don't ever want a racing stroke to be mechanical, but it should be very distinct. The arms need to lead the recovery. You need to establish a strong body position early in the compression. And it helps with the run of the boat. And you're talking about the hands and kind of, I hate pushing down the hands at the release. I don't think it should ever be done on the erg, but I am a big believer in allow the hands to extend and then let the hands get heavy and then the hands get light, because that's what you do in the boat, right? The hands get heavy, the hands get light. Doing that on the erg, and basically it's like a shallow saucer, so they kind of come out mostly level, they kind of sink a little bit, and then they rise with the knees. That's also a pattern of heavy light that translates to the boat. Hands get heavy through the middle, they get light to the catch. Whereas kind of pushing down the release, it's very awkward. And honestly, in the boat, there's not a lot, especially sculling. There's almost no tap down. It's, you're talking about fractions of an inch there. So no, that's funny. And Mary Beth's working through a period now where she's gotten slower. We're waiting to kind of get that speed back from the changes that we made. So, hopefully kind of here in Linnea, we'll get there. We'll get that speed back. She's kind of lost a few seconds in a steady state.
Well, this is kind of a theme that's come up a lot in us chatting today, but also in my, training with you, is like intuitively in my mind, I'm like, I need more time to develop step 1 before I go to step 2. But for some reason, that's just not the culture of athletics, like, and I don't know if that's just like recreational athletics, but like when I remember when we have people in our club also that will take you out to quote teach you to scull. I don't think you can learn to scull and going out on the water two times. I think going out on the water two times, I was like, maybe I'm not going to die. Like my sense of gravity, um, and people being like, oh, you shouldn't stay in that trainer very long.
Yeah.
You should graduate to this, and you should go ahead and do a race. And it just didn't make sense to me. And I thought I was maybe, I don't know. I felt like intuitively it made more sense to not do that. But it's hard to like, I don't know. It's hard to wrap your head around that like you aren't just going to get faster and faster and better every single day that you do something, like especially this sport. And I think, the unlearning, like when you're really in a good training program, you're probably unlearning things. You're running into the places that's the point. You want to find the places that don't work and you want to dig them out, but the digging out process sucks. I mean, it's like, you're like, I know this is probably going to be best in the end, but I'm not liking it today.
Yeah.
So like you were talking about when you see those numbers, when you get those, when you've seen really small numbers and you start to see big numbers, that's the mental aspect of the sport, is like, this is part of the training. Today is part of the training.
Yeah. Yeah. We had, and I mean, what you're saying, I've had people tell me the exact same thing. I've had people, cause I've been out in the Zephyr all year. Fellow teammates have been like, I don't like seeing you in that Zephyr all the time. It's going to be bad for your stroke. And it's like, well, I'm going to trust my coach. I'm going to trust my coach. And I do not feel like it's being bad for my stroke. Yeah. And people saying, just get in a racing single. The boat will teach you what you need to know. The boat will teach you how to, but I have not found that to be the case. I really doing the slow graduation and even just the day that Travis put me from the Zephyr into a racing single, even the things that he told me what to do as soon as I got in the boat, and starting with a quarter stroke, starting with and just the front of the stroke and just adding a little more length and a little more length in a way that felt like a natural progression. It was really it felt like the right way to do it intuitively, and then it also worked. So that was great.
Yeah, we've talked about this, I think, Linnea, but if a coach is doing their job, they're doing it well, an athlete should never feel uncomfortable. Like there's no reason. And what your teammates were saying is very common, and coaches say this, the boat will teach you, the boat will teach you, which is nonsense. It's like, no, the boat is not going to teach you. Your job as the coach, your job is to teach them, right? Whenever you transition from an easier platform to a harder platform, or an easy skill to a harder skill, if that is an uncomfortable transition, you've utterly failed as a coach, right? Because you failed to set them up for success. The first time I have novices row by eights, they should come off the water and be like, that was amazing. I love that. I want to do it more. Coaches that failed, a lot of coaches will be like, we're going to row by eight because I want you to see how hard it is. I want you to see how unbalanced it is. And then you'll really know how hard it is and why we're working. Horrible coaching, horrible advice, utter failure of skill on the coach's side. If I've established with novices in an eight, we are rowing the stroke I want to see by sixes when you go by eight. And then all of a sudden, you're rowing, the boat's rowing by sixes. You're like, coxswain, add in a pair, but don't drop out a pair. And you also tell the athletes before, talk to them through everything that they're going to expect. What's going to be different when you're rowing by eight? What's going to happen if you make a mistake? How do you respond to that? They are fully prepared for what's going to come. And then you go on the practice with novices. You row by eights for the first time by adding in a pair when they're rowing by sixes. They add in a pair for 20 strokes, you drop back to six. You row for a minute by sixes, you add in another pair, for 20 strokes. They feel that euphoria. It's short enough that they can kind of enjoy it. They're like, oh my God, this is amazing. You drop it out before things get too crazy, and you just keep repeating that. And over the next week, you just do longer and longer. They're not doing 20 strokes the first day. The next stroke they're doing 30 strokes. The next stroke they're doing a minute, 2 minutes. So Same thing with sculling. When you go into that single for the first time, you should come off, and you did come off. You're like, that was great. Like I felt it. Like I'm doing everything, but the boat moves a lot faster, in a racing single than it does in the Zephyr. But it's not like, oh my God, I almost flipped 3 times. Oh, I did flip. Um, not to say flipping is bad in the single, but flipping in the single when you're learning the single should be because you are pushing the limits. Like you feel so good that you're like, oh, I'm gonna really go after that front end. I'm really gonna let's try to bring up the rate, and then you flip because you made a little mistake. It's never like, oh my God, I'm not comfortable in this boat. Like if an athlete's not comfortable in a boat, you failed. You failed, and that's why
Mhm.
you don't teach people how to scull in a racing boat. You teach them how to scull in a stable boat. They develop the skills when they transition to the racing boat. Then it's about that last 10%. Then it's about fine tuning. But you're still able to row the boat competently and well. Um, and so it made me happy to hear that with you too, Linnea, when you came off that first single and you're like, that felt really good. And the key term I felt all the things that we were working on in the Zephyr and why we were working on them, which made me very happy. So
Mhm.
that was good. But
I still have my blades on the water, and then the season ended, so I'll have to. But yeah, I feel like I'll get there, and even like all the blade work we were doing and getting really comfortable in the Zephyr. When we went out the second time, and I was in the racing single, like when I got uneven, I felt very comfortable, like just quickly feathering my blades and getting them on the water without thinking about it. I just did
yeah,
that. And I feel like that's from all the other, like getting really comfortable with the feathering and squaring. So I didn't have to think about it. That's just what I did. And I imagine I'll capsize at some point, but the moments that I felt like I was getting like this, I just, did it and I was stable again.
yeah. Yeah, and the big thing about one thing the single does teach you, I'll kind of counter what I said earlier, it teaches you how to be comfortable with your blades on the water. Like it's all right if your blade skims the water. Don't try to get it off. Just let it skim. Your hands are light. You can put a little bit of downward pressure, on the water, let it come off. It comes off lightly. It's just light hands. The blade skims lightly on the water. It should be the same way in the eight. If your blade's always dragging heavy on the water, something's very wrong. You're on the single. It's very rare to get somebody from a Zephyr into the single and their blades off the water right away. You're talking like maybe, 5% of the athletes will be able to do that. And usually they're small women, small, light, high school freshmen, underclassmen women. Um, you start with the blades, flat, you can use those blades as your little pontoons, bringing it to the front. And then as you start to get more comfortable applying power in the single and really kind of accelerating and then getting a really clean release, then all of a sudden you're going to come off, your blades are off the water, and then they're off the water maybe for a quarter of the recovery. And then you find back that your blades are kind of just lightly touching again. And the better you get, now they're off the water for a third of the recovery. Then they're off the water for half the recovery. And that kind of balance of blades off the water builds from the release forward, but ultimately it comes from accelerating the boat efficiently, getting out of the water clean, and being symmetrical with that motions. And then, of course, maintaining that symmetry as you move out. So those are skills that develop over time. But again, the whole time you're comfortable with just like, it's all right if my blades are touching the water. They're touching lightly. They're not dragging. I'm not dragging on the side. It's just boom. And, instead of the boat being like this, the boat's just like this. I'm like 5 degrees off, blades on the water. But the bigger thing is don't react, right? Don't try to always get your blades off the water. It's just let it glide. Let it glide. The next stroke you can fix. Don't try to fix the stroke that you're on. And the single will help with that. But yeah. And flipping in the single when you're doing it right, like honestly, the best single sculler I had flipped all the time because she was just a firebrand. She was lightweight high school sculler and she was just aggressive. And she flipped because she was just like went crazy, and sometimes she went a little bit too nuts, but it was good, so it was great with that boat. Um, let's talk a little bit about the physical side because I think both of us have had huge paradigm shifts in terms of how we train, program wise on the erg and the workouts we do. Linnea, I'll let you start a little bit about that and kind of the biggest shifts there and kind of how you felt the program of GTS and the remote coaching and how things are structured and how that was different than what you had before and how it worked or, even things that you had, trepidation about or, we needed to adjust on the fly.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot more UT2. I actually learned how to do UT2,
Mm.
uh, which we really weren't doing before. And this is partially my fault because if I get in a room with other people and I don't have a number I'm supposed to hit, I'm going to try to be the fastest person in the room. And that's if you try to do that all the time, you're going to burn yourself out. And so I was kind of feeling like I was doing that before. But yeah, learning to do UT2, learning to be patient with, starting in the high teens and letting the number fall as I went on. And then getting used to doing the longer UT2 pieces. I was really proud of myself the first time I did a 90-minute UT2 piece and got through it and was faster by the end than I was at the beginning. Um, and so there's that on one end. UT1 was like, it was an adjustment to figure out how to do UT1 in a way where I wasn't where it was something I could maintain over 20 or 25 minutes. I know people do much longer UT1 pieces than that, but that's probably as far as we got this year on the erg. And then on the other end, there were these really hard, fast pieces with lots of rest. And I know from CrossFit that a lot of rest is a trap. If you see a lot of rest, you're going to be working really, really hard. And so learning to do those and learning to approach the first ones conservatively, but then really put down as much effort as I could in the later ones, was just kind of learning where my levels of effort were and really fine tuning those was something that I feel like the program did.
Awesome. Yeah, the pieces I do almost do all more rest than most people in the sport with pieces, but it's quality. You need one, those pieces need to hit a certain speed. We do a lot of stuff with the rate to manage effort. So you're still working, but you're working at maybe a 22, 24 at the beginning of the workout, whereas you might be at 30 at the end, and so it's still proportional to the split in terms of the power per stroke, but because the stroke rate is low, it's kind of you're ramping in. So yeah, that's a big thing that I see. And the UT1, I mean, I think a lot of people overdo UT1 in terms of volume. Like I don't think there's any reason to ever do UT1 more than 50 minutes, and that's for like elite rowers. Once you're doing more than 50 minutes, it benefits you more to do multiple 50-minute sessions than do just like an 80 or 90 minute. But the volume of UT1 is definitely proportional to the amount of UT2 that you're doing. So you're not that far off. I mean, 25-minute UT1, I don't think I would see you getting much more than 30, 35 minutes, for a session. And again, it's because I would rather do more frequency than just do one really long UT1 workout. Um, and your comments about UT2, and obviously with the big changes that we made, Mary Beth, when we get to you on this one, is, almost exclusively, unless I have an athlete that's like a veteran college athlete that understands UT2, you know, we inevitably spend the first 4 to 6 weeks learning how to do UT2 properly. It's just deficient and the sport just doesn't really understand. Especially the sport is very trendy about heart rate these days, and it's very much the wrong trend. It's kind of putting people in a lot of the in the wrong direction and wasting a lot of time, which for me is a cardinal sin of coaching. Don't ever waste your athlete's time. Make sure you're being very efficient, and spending 90 minutes doing for a guy doing a steady state at a 230 just to keep their heart rate in an arbitrary zone is horrible. But teaching people how to do that UT2, what is the pressure, what is the drag, what is the stroke rates, and I think you came in that a lot. I don't remember, Mary Beth, what our stroke rates were for UT2, but I know, Linnea, you were used to doing UT2 20 to 24, 26.
Yeah,
And we were just like, no, dude, that's,
24, and
we're
now
talking
you
about
have me doing them
16 to
at
18. Yeah.
14 to 18. Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
usually closer to the higher end of that, but
Which is I am too. Like I usually 17, 18. If I'm like in a really Zen-like place, I can tab along at 15, 16. Um, but yeah, usually I'm at the higher end. And Mary Beth, you too, like you came from you're barely a training program, definitely not an effective one. And so I'm curious kind of I mean, you made huge changes, huge progress in terms of the power and what we're doing. And so I'm curious kind of what that learning process was like and kind of what stood out along the way that was different than what you were used to.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you do is built on information that makes sense. Like it's an evidence-based approach. And I think a lot of the other training methods that I had been exposed to were, I don't know, just someone's idea that they put out there. And I definitely respond better when I understand the purpose of what we're doing and when I can see that it's making a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, a lot of what's available to masters athletes are like, a 12-week training program online. And, everybody has different needs. And so it's more about like, do like 3 times 20 minutes. It's not like the type of workout, like the workout is, what you were describing when you say like, do it for this long, warm up this much. This is how it should feel. This is the stroke rate you're going for. This is the split you're going for. It kind of helps. It's helped to teach me like what that type of workout feels like, I think that, I mean, certainly the program we were doing in my club was like, it didn't make any sense to me. It was like, do like 30-second intervals and then do 8 long intervals and then do 20 minutes, like all in one sitting, and everyone just go as fast as you can all the time. And I know, this is not to like disparage, people who are trying to kind of come in and help a group do things. But it was not working for me. And I intuitively knew I needed to be doing less and it needed to be more targeted, but I didn't know how to plan it out, but I think some of the things you've taught me, Travis, like, I like the rhythm of the loading days. I like having that rhythm, because it feels more like I'm following like my body's energy availability versus like, oh, it's Sunday, I have to get up and do blah, 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 and I also like how you've taught me about, if you don't feel good, don't do it. Like I think I had one day where I was doing intervals and I was like, thought I was going to be okay, but it just like, I didn't give myself enough time to get hydrated. I had gotten up really early. I felt kind of sick when I was doing it. And I was like, man, I wish I could redo that. And you said, well, next time, if you don't feel prepared, it's okay to do a different workout and put that off.
Yeah.
So just that like mindset that like, it's good for the body to be ready. It's good for the body to be ready. It's good for the body to be rested. Like take an extra day if you need to. If you're traveling, just add in days off, add in unloading days, do what you can. And like, I don't know, it's not even necessarily just like taking the pressure off of like sticking with your program. It's more just like this attitude of like, just kind of going with the ebbs and flows and not thinking of it as like something that got lost, that like you keep doing the workouts and you keep like aspiring to what you're doing, and that actually by doing that, you will do it better. Whereas if I'm like, I have to work out every day, or I have to make sure I, do this when I'm on vacation, or I have to go as hard as I can, or even if I'm sick, I have to still do it. And, if I throw up, it's like a sign of,
Yeah.
effort.
Yeah.
That doesn't help me get faster. So, it's been really cool to see that. I've really enjoyed that. Yeah, I think understanding, like, I didn't even know what UT2 meant. And honestly, all that heart rate calculating stuff, that stuff does not work for me, because when I'm doing UT2, my heart rate goes up to like 145. And when I'm doing like anaerobic, my heart rate goes up to like maybe 160. So like I have a very narrow window there, so like 80%, 90%, all that stuff, that did not work for me. So it's been really cool to learn about that. And I know now, like when I get my workouts, like, okay, this is what I'm working on. This is kind of the rhythm of it. I also really like that you kind of have like a pace to the workouts, and they're kind of similar, like as we go through the cycle. So I know what it is, and I don't have to like study and relearn, like, what is it I'm doing and why am I doing it? And also I can see changes, like, oh, this was my target. And, my split was like, a few seconds faster. So, I mean, I think I calculated because, when you're doing UT2 for like an hour, it's many thousands of meters. And, a couple of seconds off of that is like minutes. If you're looking at like, if I did like a 10,000 meter piece or something, like minutes has come off in a couple of months, that's really cool. So I've really enjoyed that too. And even if it's not faster, just kind of, I don't know, I guess like feeling like more familiar with what my body can do and where my body is and what it's working on, rather than just like get this workout, do it. Was it good? Was it not good? And like keep going. And I know you said that's one of your goals is like to teach people what to do. And I feel like I'm absorbing some of that.
Yeah, I think it's very important. Like our instincts are the greatest tool we have available, and a lot of training tries to suppress those instincts or ignore those instincts a lot. And with my training, it's very important to kind of be aware and to um, really enable the athlete to understand and to read those instincts and then to
Mhm.
respond and adapt appropriately. And I think, you're talking before about kind of the loading days and the pattern is like the system that I've developed with this, and I was able to kind of implement it fairly well with kind of the youth teams, but it's very difficult with the team to do it well. But certainly kind of with the one-on-one kind of remote stuff, that the program should be very organic and reactive to what's going on with you in your life. And the biggest thing is like you can't control the instincts. Like even if you have an athlete in high school or athlete in college where you can kind of control, what's going on to some degree with their lives, with, us as adults, with busy lives and relationships and commitments, family or work, whatever it is that all those things are changing and all those things have an impact on your body and your body's capacity to train and to load at any time. And so with this system, we try to develop a system that is very adaptive and reactive to what's going on with your life. It's very easy to kind of call an audible with your training. It's really about making steady progress forward. And it doesn't matter if you spend a week taking baby steps and then you start taking some more steps, and then you have a week that's great and you take big, long steps and strides forward, as long as you can know what's going on and you can adapt really easily. And that's what the system is designed to do, and I enjoy hearing that it's doing that, and you feel that kind of natural flow. Because it's hard. Like if you're just like if a lot of coaches will just give you a calendar, and it's like on November 13th, this is your workout, and it's like it's high-end anaerobic pieces, but you slept 3 hours last night because the neighbor's dog just kept barking because there was a skunk in the yard or something like that. Or, you just came off a work trip, or you just have a project that's stressing you out, or you have a family member that's just like driving you up the wall and you're just like, you're stressed out the max. Your body is not ready for that. But you're like, well, it's the 13th and the calendar says I should do this, and there's no flexibility in it. There needs to be flexibility. You need to be able to adapt and react. All right, let's plug in. All right, I was supposed to do this. I was going to do this day, but let's kind of call an audible. Let's take a little unloading day. Allow the body to get to where it needs to be to train at a high
Mhm.
level. And then when the body's ready, then you train it. You send it the stimulus to get better, and then you give it the time to get better. So yeah, I like that. And it's been fun being able to apply that kind of with the remote coaching and coaching all these individuals is that you can really, the essence of the training program is able to come out and you kind of see that with the athletes. The athletes respond very well to it.
Mhm. Also warming up. Like I never really, I think in my mind, warming up was like a minute, you know,
Yeah.
like I get on the water now with my friend and she's quite a bit younger than me. And she'll be like, well, the first piece will kind of be like a warm up. And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
I need 15 minutes to warm up. Like I have been
Yeah.
trained by Travis and we warm up now.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially as we get older, man. Like those long warm-ups. And even when I was young, even though I was in my early 20s training to try to make the transition to elite from pre-elite, um, there's a, you just, your end of the workout is so much better when you warm up properly. And the end of workout is really what sends the body the stimulus to get better. Like the first 20 minutes of your 60-minute steady state is not what's making you better. It's the last 20 minutes. And so you take a long time, you allow the body to loosen naturally and warm, and you just perform better at the back end. And especially as we get older, that might more from 5 minutes that you might need as a 16-year-old to 15, at least 10 minutes, as we are in our 40s and 50s now. And it makes a huge difference, and again, you're not losing anything by warming up. You are losing stuff by going too hard too soon, because essentially what it's like hopping in your car in the middle of winter without warming it up. Like there's a lot of stress you put on the engine to go 45 miles per hour down the highway. It takes more work for the engine to do that when it's not warmed up. It's the same thing with us. If your capillaries haven't kind of dilated, if your muscles are still warm, it takes more work to go at that split, than if you warmed up and then you're going out of split. Because you warm up, yeah, you're just like your body opens up, you get looser, your muscles are warmer, more supple, and then you do that. And then, another key feature of UT2, which we talk to you guys a lot, is that if you're doing UT2 right, you should always be going faster the longer that you're doing it, not because you're working harder, but simply because the body continues to warm up. You continue to get looser. You tend to get more, being at the catch is a stretch. So you're stretching, 18 times a minute. You're stretching that long for 40 minutes. All of a sudden you're really flexible. And at the end of your row, you can be longer, and that means more speed. And so yeah, that the warm up is key, especially for us adult athletes. I always tell a funny story. I remember when I came off my novice year, um, I was still in that mode where everything you just did as hard as you could, and then I taught myself how to scull at a local program. I was sent out in a single and taught how to get back in after I flipped, and then I was told, roll in the square until you can do it, and then you can feather. And that's how I would learn how to row the single. And I would warm up on the erg before I got on the water. And my warm up was a 2K, and if I felt good, it was a 7:05 2K, and if I felt a little sluggish that day, it was a 7:20 2K. But it was still kind of a somewhat restrained, hard effort. I mean, I was, my novice year, I was 6:44 or something 2K, so it wasn't max effort 2K. But but yeah, it was still like going hard. I was just like I went hard, and then went road. And so yeah, it's you do crazy stupid stuff when you're young and your body, is amazing. And then as we get older, but even then, my youth athletes, they benefit from the warm up. So, but they still have that mentality. It's like, oh well, 3 minutes, I'm ready to go. Let's do our race pieces. But it doesn't work that way.
We had a joke in strongman that was like, how does a strongman warm up? You walk to the truck before
Yeah.
you pull. And I never felt like I needed a warm up with any of my athletic stuff until I hit my late 30s. And now, yeah, I really feel like I benefit from the warm up. And even with the 3-minute pieces, I noticed like in pieces 7 and 8, it takes very little time for my heart rate to get back up to the level. I think part of what makes the early pieces hard, aside from the fact that they're on a lower rate, trying to hit a pretty low split at a pretty low rate, is that I'm not as warmed up, and my heart rate my heart has to work harder to get to being able to output the energy. And by the pieces 7 and 8, it's just as soon as I start rowing, all that energy is available.
Yeah. Which is counterintuitive, but it's totally true. Like those and that's part of why we keep the rate low, because I know your body's still loose and warming up. I don't want to kind of let the reins out on that. And yeah, I mean, I always find it amazing when you're doing like, 8 by 3 minutes. I mean, your last pieces are your fastest by far. I mean, you're doing it right. You're doing that workout right. Every piece is faster than the one before it. But yeah, you might start, for me, I might start at a 147, and then the last piece I'm hitting 139, and it's just like, I've already done 21 minutes of this, and now here I am rowing the fastest. And so similar for you guys. And yeah, I mean, this if a workout is properly structured, all those things should happen. It should warm you up properly. It should feel the right way. You should be able to negative split it, with the rates. And I think that's a big thing that, one of my goals with GTS too is to start doing coaching clinics, and really teaching coaches like to understand how to structure a workout, how to structure a training program, why you're doing this, because a lot of us kind of figure it out piecemeal as we go. But understanding that and how do you set it up and how do you get what you need to. But more importantly, if a workout is structured the way it's supposed to and you're executing the way that you're supposed to, that puts you in the training zone. And so you don't have to worry about, well, this will this workout put me in, what training zone am I in this workout? A properly designed workout can only be completed the way it was intended in the training zone. And so it takes care of same thing with UT2, UT1. If you're doing a UT2 the way it's supposed to be executed, that's how you know it's UT2 because structurally it is designed to do that. And that's why a lot of the heart rate stuff is nonsense because it's just like, well, not to mention that everyone has different heart rates. I have athletes that like Grace, who Linnea got to work with a lot, who is an alumni of mine that is a couple of years out of college and wanted to get back into high performance rowing. And I even remember when Grace was in high school. I mean, Grace did stay at 190 BPM and could chat like you should do on UT2. And her doubles partner was pretty similar. She was in the 180s, and it's just like those athletes, the heart works different. And one of the guys that I won national championship with that went on to row in the quad at Worlds, he was the opposite end. Like his steady state was like 115, 120, and he would race at a 155 or something like that. And so it's so different. And unfortunately, I've had athletes. I had one athlete specifically that went to BU, and she was another athlete that worked at high heart rates for state, like 170, 180. And then BU was on this heart rate kick, and they were forcing her to do state like 130, 140. And it was torture, because it was basically like she is like a brisk walk, and because they didn't understand heart rate and they didn't understand how variable people are.
Mhm.
But as far as UT2 is like UT2 feels a very specific way, and heart rate is very valuable, but it has to be tuned to the person. And so if you do your steady state and you're doing UT2 because you're doing it structurally the way it's supposed to, you can observe your heart rate and you can see, all right, well, what are the trends of my heart rate when I'm doing UT2? And then you can use the heart rate kind of as a guide, mainly for abnormalities. Like, is something off? Like, am I sick? Normally for me, it's like I might warm when I sit down to UT2. I'll start at like, mid to high 130s, maybe 140s, and I'll gradually drift up into kind of the high 140s as I warm up. And then from there on, it's a very slow drift to the high 160s. And generally 168 is where I see the top end of my UT2. But if I'm sitting down and I know usually it takes me 30 minutes to get to a 155 or a 150, but today I'm at a 160 already, and I'm 20 minutes in the piece. Well, then something's wrong. So your heart rate is very valuable in a sense of once you've established your baseline and you know what your heart rate range is and your trends are, then you can see abnormalities and like, oh, something's wrong today. Maybe my immune system is fighting off, a virus or something like that. Um,
I
so
also noticed as I did more UT2 at the end of the winter that I could do the same distance, same like felt like the same effort, but the max heart rate I reached was lower.
lower, yeah, totally,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, we talked about cardiac drift and the so cardiac drift is the natural rise in heart rate over time because your body's getting warmer. The warmer the heart is, the kind of more it works. But the heart is a very different muscle, obviously, than all your other muscles in your body, so it kind of reacts different. But another thing I see with the heart rate trends and training is that they'll be like, well, just keep your heart rate in the zone. And so you have people that will be doing their steady state split, and suddenly they'll just be going, they'll start going slower and slower and slower because they're trying to keep that heart rate there, which is just even worse. It's just like, that's horrible when you're no longer doing UT2. You're trying to hit this arbitrary heart rate, which is just trying to go up because of drift. But in terms of what you're saying, like the true measure of aerobic improvement is the slope of that curve over time. So maybe if you're doing 40 minutes at the beginning of your season and your heart rate's drifting from, after you warm up, it's drifting from 140 to 160. So you're talking about a 20 lift over 40 minutes. So, your slope is one half. Well, if you do that for a season and all of a sudden you're doing 60 minutes and you're only drifting from that 140 to 155, the slope of your curve is lower. That's the sign that you're improving aerobically. And that can also inform how long your UT2s are. Is like, all right, well, is my slope drifting lower? I know that I generally want to end my UT2 around this point. For me, it was always 168. And it was like, well, maybe now it takes me 90 minutes to get to 168, whereas before it took me 60 minutes. And that tells me, so if I'm finishing my 60 minutes, I'm only getting to 162. I'm like, okay, well, I'm ready to do longer steady states. And maybe it's, if I add another 15 minutes, that's how long it takes me to drift up to 168. So that's a very natural, intuitive way to build volume, rather than just arbitrarily being like, well, we did 60 minutes last week, we got to do 70 minutes next week and 80 minutes the next week. But yeah, well, very cool. Do you guys are here? Do you guys have any questions you want to bounce off each other? Kind of about, what you think, what you experienced, or maybe a hurdle that you encountered, or something along those lines? Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah. I mean, I more just want to gossip about clubs, so maybe we should.
Yeah, we can cut it and then we can kind of
Yeah.
gossip about clubs. Yeah, it's like I've been with you. You both have plenty of gossip to share, but all good. Well, let's end it there for kind of for the masses. Hopefully, they were able to draw out a lot from this conversation. I really appreciate your guys' willingness to share these insights with the broader community. I do feel like there are other masters women or masters men out there who can, listen to this and kind of empathize with your experiences, be like, oh, that's what I went through, and two, if it brings people into GTS and I can help them, that's great. The big thing is, Mary Beth, you came up for a workshop a couple weeks ago, which was great because it was a proof of concept of what a GTS was originally supposed to be. And so I've
Hmm.
been able to take that proof of concept and kind of lay the foundation to really do workshops all through next year. And so people that are listening that have
Awesome.
interest in coming in person. And the goal right now is one thing is going to be very small groups. I think I'm going to start at 3. So it's no more than 3. I don't think you're going to find any camp out there that's limiting the numbers like that. I believe, as you guys have felt, that coaching should be very focused on the individual. Keeping a small group will allow me to do that. And there'll be a learn to scull for indoor rowers, learn to scull for sweep rowers. There'll be, developmental sculling for level 1 scullers, and people will have to submit video to make sure that that's the right skill level and that we know what to work on. And then we'll do, how to coach sculling. We'll have coaching clinics as well. And so I'm very excited to kind of add that. So people listening that might be interested, keep an eye on the website for that and announcements. And one thing, this can be a little gossipy without getting into your club, but Mary Beth, you had gone to Craftsbury
Hmm.
shortly before we came to here. And I'm really curious in yours because Craftsbury is kind of like the big one. I know All American Rowing Camps is another popular one. I'm really curious about your relative experience between Craftsbury and the workshop that we had where we were working together and what you got out of it and the structure of it and how they were different.
Yeah, so when I was learning how to scull, several people had said to me, you need to go to a camp. And a lot of people really love Craftsbury. So I went there. And it was really beautiful and it was a cool experience. I think the most useful thing I took away from it was that I don't know, there were a lot of youth rowers there, and you all know the culture of rowing. Like there's some elitism, and just kind of seeing how different people approach different people, I decided, I want to be the kind of rower that like I encourage anybody I see, like I greet them and I encourage them with whatever their goals are. As far as actually rowing, um, I really didn't take away that much. We had a lot of water time, but honestly, I did a 5-day program and we had 3 water sessions a day, but only the morning one was coached and it was in a group and it was a different coach every day. And this was a rotating group of coaches who were all really like distinguished, accomplished coaches, but had varying levels of interest in coaching someone like me. and really wanted me to go faster when I couldn't even hold the handles, you know. Um, so, um, so yeah, I mean, I think it's a fun experience. It's kind of like a vacation. There did seem to be people there who got a lot out of it, and maybe because their level of skill was at a place where coaches more enjoyed being with them. Like there were a lot of collegiate coaches there. I could imagine like, you know, being with somebody who's just getting on the water maybe isn't as exciting. Um, and maybe it's different during different weeks, but it definitely wasn't, in my opinion, a place to go to get technically better. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for, you know, it again, it's beautiful. It was a really cool setting, but I'm not really looking for a vacation. You know, I just want to like learn the skills and get better, no frills. So that was my takeaway.
And like for that, yeah, it seems like there's no consistency from coaching because you got a different person every time. They have no idea what the previous person was doing. If it's a big group, can they really focus on you? But more
No.
importantly, for me, I'm like, they still charged you, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
if you're taking
Yeah.
their money and you're saying we're going to make you a better scholar, you better make them a better scholar. You better
Yeah.
make them feel like they came away. And so that's why structurally with the workshops I want to set up, it is very small. It's going to be more expensive, but you will take away skills that you can go and continue working on and develop at home. Like it's just
Yeah.
same thing with the coaching. Like I want to get in, we're start to add some coaching education to some camps there. I've gone to so many kind of coaching education conferences and you hear people talk and you listen to ideas and philosophies, but you're never like, this is how you coach. This is how you develop the training program. This is how you structure it. This is how you adapt it to people. That you don't get out. And I wanted, for me as a coach, and pretty much every coach out there, unless you happen to be lucky to fall into, a very good mentor's chase boat along the way, you kind of figure it out as you go and you kind of, are just kind of experimenting, trial and error. And I
Hmm.
knew when I started coaching and I had to teach myself all this, I was like, when I was in my first year of coaching, 2 years of coaching, I was like, eventually I want to teach coaches how to coach because I didn't have this and I've had to learn all this and develop and read God knows how many books and studies to develop the system and experiment on myself, experiments that ultimately kept me from being an elite athlete myself because I just spent years experimenting. Not all of those went well. Heart rate training, being one of them. Um, and so yeah, having that experience, but my certainly, we talked about philosophy as a coach, never waste anybody's time, but don't waste their money either. It's like if
Hmm.
they come and they're coming to learn how to row, teach them how to row. And you can't do that if you have, eight athletes of all different skill levels and, running around and you spend half your time trying to corral them. It's gotta be small.
Hmm.
It's gotta be focused. Ultimately, you make less money that way. Man, Craftsbury needs to make money, because all those boats
Hmm.
and stuff. But hopefully we can break that mold, with what I'm trying to do here. And it's
Yeah.
been
I
fun with
think,
you guys. Linnea, you get it all the time because you can just, send me a text and be like, let's get on the water.
Yeah.
The tides are favorable and it's not freezing cold or it's, not windy and we can do it. And Mary Beth, it was really fun to get you up here so that we could kind of do that in that workshop and show that
yeah.
it worked, show that the concept worked, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's something that you do really well is like very quickly assessing an individual's, um, kind of like their needs and also like um, understanding what needs to be taught next.
Mhm.
And you know, other people that I have been around will point out everything that I'm doing wrong. And it's really hard to integrate something like that. Like I'm kind of methodical. Like I have to try one thing and then I have to add another thing. And I think you do that really, really well. And I think you know a lot about what works. Like what you're talking about, your learning and your experimenting. And I know you've, done a lot of your own work on like strength training and understanding that. And, um, you know, it's a different experience to be with a coach who's doing that versus a coach who's like, I love the sport and I want to show up for people and I had this experience and I want to share it with other people. Like that's a great, that's a great experience for a lot of people, but for someone like me who really needs some like very specific foundational skill change,
Mhm.
I need specific feedback, and it needs to be like structured intentionally. So I think that's what you do really well.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel that the diagnostic and the structure, I think, is my greatest skill as coach. And that's another thing I want to have very specific in the coaching education. And my goal is to kind of, Linnea, hopefully this will be plausible, but my goal is to kind of reach out to the local community and be like, hey, is there any volunteers that want to be our guinea pig for this coaching education? You're gonna get three days of high level coaching. You just got to be the one that we work with and we diagnose. And but having coaches there and having an athlete and kind of doing like a case study of an athlete, this is all right. We all see 12 things wrong. What's the first one we got to deal? And I think coaches have no idea how to do that. The diagnostic side is lost. And we've all had those coaches that are just like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And you're like, okay, how's that help me? What do I do? Or even like more frustrating. And I remember sitting in my 8 in college and just thinking, dude, just shut the fuck up and let me row. Like, because it was like the coaching. And then they wouldn't let you just work on that. And then as soon as they maybe start to see you get it right, they moved on to the next thing. And it was like, all right, well, that all went out the window. And now I'm focusing on this. That coach's ability to diagnose, to understand how one issue leads into another, and finding what's the core issue, and then starting there and building. And Linnea, we did that with you on the erg. It was like, okay, there's a lot of things off here. How do we build it down? What do we do first? What do we do second? We work on the posture. We work on the separation. We work on the rhythm and the control. And that led into the stroke that you have now, which is a beautiful stroke. And so, yeah, that's good, so it's fun. And hopefully we can teach other coaches to do it. As frustrated as I am with the quality of coaching in the sport, I know why it's there. It's because none of us get taught how to coach. It's just like, hey, like you said, Mary Beth, like the coaches, 95% of the coaches in the sport are just as I love the sport. It did wonderful things for my life and I want to share that. And that's a great thing. But at some point, you also still have to have the skill. And there's really, U.S. Rowing does a shit job of teaching coaches. So hopefully I can do a small part in kind of getting coaches better. And hopefully those coaches can then go, kind of pay it forward and do it again.
Yeah, I know we're wrapping up, but I feel like that was a really good insight about the coaching that you do, because I remember being frustrated, especially in my first couple of years, if I'd get told to do something and I'd do it, it'd be really hard. And then I get told to do something else. And I felt like it was fighting with the other thing I'd been told to do. Whereas as we work through things, everything is built on each other. And when I start to do one thing right, everything else feels better. And I don't think any kind of coaching that you get should there's still like rebuilding process, but it shouldn't, if you change one thing, it shouldn't ruin everything else.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, we'll keep doing the right things and making things better. And if something gets ruined, speak up. That's another good thing about one-on-one is you can be like, Travis, this isn't working. Let's redirect. And then we can kind of sit down and just muse. Be like, all right, well, what is working? Is this wrong? Is this not there? And, that for me, that's fun and I like these conversations. I appreciate you guys giving the time because it helps me. This is part of kind of my feedback and development process. What are the things that are good? What are the things that I can focus on and kind of get better? And so I appreciate that. And again, hopefully our conversation helps other people out there. And yeah, I can't wait for the next season with you guys. It's been a fun ride this last year and seeing all your progress. And so we'll keep it up. We'll keep doing it.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies.